The relay station at Kepler's Reach was not a fortress. It had never pretended to be one. It was a listening post, a fuel depot, and a hydroponics experiment that had gotten out of hand, all bolted together on a nickel-iron asteroid that had no name before humans gave it one. 211 people lived there. 43 of them were children. There was a school with one teacher and a class that ranged from 6 years old to 15, and a machine shop that could fabricate almost anything if you gave it enough time, and did not mind that it sounded like a dying animal. There was a garden under glass that grew tomatoes badly and strawberries superbly, and a woman named Inez Okonkwo, who had kept the station's air scrubbers running for 19 years, and who, on the last morning of her life, had been arguing cheerfully with a 14-year-old about the correct way to torque a fitting. None of this was known to the officers of the Sovereign Dominion cruiser Ascendant Reach when they cut their engines 11 light minutes out and began their approach. They knew the station's mass. They knew its power signature. They knew that it sat astride a shipping lane that the Dominion had, on charts drawn up in a marble hall 4,000 light-years away, decided was theirs. They knew that the humans had put something on it, and that the something was small, and that it had no capital-grade weapons. They did not know about Inez Okonkwo. They did not ask. Lieutenant Junior Grade Adiz Farrow was 19 days into her first posting when the light from Kepler's Reach reached her. She was in the sensor pit of the survey cutter Long Patience, a vessel whose name was a joke about her mission profile, and whose crew of 31 had spent 4 months mapping the gravitational eddies at the edge of the Sagan Drift. Farrow was 23 years old. She had a face that had not yet learned to hide anything, and a habit of chewing the inside of her cheek when she concentrated. And she was, at that moment, doing something that she would later be unable to describe without her voice going strange. She was watching a star that was not a star. "Sir," she said. She said it quietly because the pit was quiet, because the pit was always quiet, because Long Patience ran her watches the way a library runs its reading rooms. "Sir, I have a thermal event at bearing 014, mark -6. Commander Idris Vale did not look up from his slate. He was a compact man with gray coming in at the temples, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent a great deal of his life waiting for machines to tell him things. Magnitude. Working. Farrow's hands moved. The numbers came up and she read them, and then she read them again because the first reading had to be wrong. "Sir, magnitude is 4.1 times 10 to the 15th joules. Point source. Duration 11 seconds and decaying." Now he looked up. "Say the bearing again, Lieutenant." 014 mark -6. Range, she swallowed. "Range 11 light minutes, sir. That's Kepler's Reach." Vale crossed the pit in 4 steps. He did not run. Farrow would remember that later, would think about it for years, that he did not run, that he simply arrived, and that when he leaned over her shoulder to look at her screen, his breathing had not changed at all. "Sir," she said, "that energy release is consistent with—" "I know what it's consistent with." His voice was flat and even. "Give me the spectral breakdown." She gave it to him. Cesium lines, structural alloys vaporizing, the unmistakable ugly signature of a fusion warhead detonating against a hardened surface, and then, 8 seconds later, another, and then a third that was smaller and lower and had a different character entirely. And Farrow knew what that one was too, because they had taught her at the academy, and she had thought at the time that it was a strange thing to teach. That third signature was atmosphere venting. That third signature was a habitat opening. "Sir," she said, and her voice did something she hated. "Sir, there are 211 people on that rock." Vale straightened up. "Helm," he said, in exactly the same tone he had used a moment ago. "Come to 014 mark -6, all available. Comms, get me a burst to fleet on the priority channel. My authentication text as follows. Kepler's Reach relay under attack, ordnance detonations observed. Long Patience responding, request immediate. Send it 3 times. Sensors, I want everything you can find in that volume, and I want it 30 seconds ago. Sir, said the helm officer, we're a survey cutter. We've got a mining laser and a hull rated for micrometeorites. I'm aware of the ship I command, Vale said. Execute the order. Long Patience turned. It took her 9 minutes to build to full acceleration, and in those 9 minutes Pharaoh sat in the sensor pit and watched a place she had never been die in slow motion, 11 minutes behind, in light that had left before she was told to care. Here is what Pharaoh saw, in the language of instruments, which is the only language she had. At timestamp 0834:11, a power spike consistent with a Dominion Vista-class cruiser dropping its stealth envelope at close range. At 0834:19, a station-wide emergency broadcast on the open channel, unencrypted, 4 seconds long, cut off. At 0834:40, the first warhead. At 0834:48, the second. At 0835:03, a third detonation, smaller, and the venting signature. At 0836:22, a small drive flare leaving the station's surface. A shuttle. Unarmed, unshielded, running. At 0836:51, a point defense discharge from the cruiser. At 0836:52, the drive flare stopped. Pharaoh sat in her chair and did not move and did not make a sound, and the numbers kept coming, and at some point Commander Vale put a hand on the back of her chair, not on her shoulder, on the chair, and said, so quietly that no one else in the pit could hear it, record everything. That's the whole of your job right now, Lieutenant. Record everything and get it right and let the rest wait. Yes, sir. Say it back. Record everything, she said. Get it right. Let the rest wait. Good, said Vale, and went to talk to his engineer about whether the fusion plant would tolerate a 14% overburn. And Pharaoh found, to her enormous surprise, that she could work. They arrived at Kepler's Reach 19 hours later. The cruiser was gone. It had left within the hour, according to the light, which meant it had been gone for the better part of a day, by the time Long Patience limped into the volume with her plant running hot enough to make the coolant lines sing. Vale brought them in slow, on a wide arc, with every passive sensor open and every active one dark, because he was not a man who assumed anything. There was no ambush, there was just the rock. Pharaoh had seen images of Kepler's Reach in her briefing packet. She knew what it was supposed to look like. A lumpy dark potato of a thing, 4 kilometers on its long axis, with the station structures clustered on one end like barnacles, and the garden dome glinting near the middle, and the relay array spread out along the spine like the ribs of some patient animal. The array was gone, not damaged. Gone, sheared off at the mounts, a line of stubs and slag. The garden dome was a crater. The habitat modules had been opened. That was the word Pharaoh's mind kept using, and she could not make it use a different one. Opened. Something had come along the row of them and opened each one in turn, and the interiors had emptied into vacuum, and what had been inside was now a slow, bright cloud drifting away from the rock at 14 meters per second, glittering in the light of a star that was too far away to have a name anyone used. Sensors, said Vale, life signs. Pharaoh ran the sweep. She ran it again. She ran it a third time with the gain up so high that the display filled with the ship's own noise. Negative, sir. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that later and ashamed of being proud. No thermal, no respiration, no transponders, nothing. Sweep the volume. Escape pods, suits, anything under acceleration. She swept the volume. It took 2 hours. She found 17 objects, and each one, when the optics resolved it, was debris. A section of decking, a fuel bladder, a locker tumbling, its door still shut. At the end of the second hour she found the 18th object, and it was under power. Sir, she sat up so fast her chair squealed. Sir, I have a transponder, intermittent. Bearing 229, range 9,000 kilometers. It's a suit beacon. The bridge went absolutely silent. "Confirmed," said Vale. "Confirmed. Suit beacon, Terran commercial pattern, battery at," she read it and her stomach dropped. "Battery at 4%, sir. It's cycling. It's been cycling for a day." Vale did not hesitate. "Helm, intercept. Medical to the small bay. Lieutenant Farrow, you have the beacon, you talk it in. Don't lose it." "Yes, sir." It took 40 minutes to close. Farrow talked to the beacon the whole way, which was foolish, because a beacon is not a person and cannot hear, but she talked to it anyway in a low, steady murmur, reading off ranges, and nobody told her to stop. The suit held a girl. She was 15 years old. Her name was Priya Anand, and she had been in the machine shop when the first warhead hit, and the machine shop had a suit locker because the machine shop had a vacuum bay, and she had gotten into a suit in 19 seconds because Inez Okonkwo had made every child on that rock practice it until they hated her for it. Then the shop had come apart around her, and she had gone out with the air, and she had been in the dark for 26 hours with her beacon on and her heater off, because she had done the math on her battery and decided she would rather be cold than silent. She was hypothermic. She had a fractured wrist. She was, the ship's doctor said, the toughest patient he had ever handled, and he had been a fleet surgeon for 11 years. She was the only one. Farrow was not in the medical bay when they brought her in. Farrow was in the sensor pit because Vale had left her there and because the work was not finished. But she was in the corridor 8 hours later when Priya Anand woke up, and she heard, through a door that had not quite latched, the doctor asking gently whether there was anyone the girl wanted them to contact. And she heard the answer, and she carried it for the rest of her life. "There's nobody," Priya said. "Everybody I know was on the rock." Long patients stayed at Kepler's Reach for 6 days. Vale would not leave. Fleet told him to withdraw, and he sent back a message that Farrow was not cleared to read, but which, she gathered from the engineer's expression, had contained the phrase forensic integrity approximately 4 times and had not contained any phrase resembling an apology. They mapped it, that was the word Vale used. Not investigated, not surveyed, mapped. He put every hand he had on the problem, and he divided the volume into cells and he had them walk it, cell by cell, with instruments, the way you would walk a field. Farrow ran the debris analysis. It was, on paper, a technical exercise. In practice, it was the most terrible thing she had ever done, because debris analysis means resolving objects, and resolving objects means looking at them, and not all of the objects were structural. On the 3rd day, she found a warhead casing. It was a fragment the size of a dinner plate, and it had a serial line stamped into it, and it was tumbling 900 kilometers off the rock's north face. She had the cutter's grapple on it inside the hour. She had the serial line photographed and cross-referenced inside too. She took it to Vale herself. "Dominion Ordnance," she said. "Vishter-class complement, standard loadout. The serial prefix is a manufacturing lot, sir. The lot number is intact." Vale turned the fragment over in his hands. He was wearing gloves, and he handled it the way a man handles evidence, which is to say with a kind of impersonal tenderness. "Do you know what this is, Lieutenant?" "It's proof, sir." "It's better than proof." He set it down on the table between them, carefully aligned with the edge. "Proof is what you show a court. This is a thread. Lot numbers go to depots. Depots go to requisitions. Requisitions have signatures on them." He looked up at her. "Someone signed for this. Someone in an office at a desk with a pen. And in about 6 months, if we do our jobs properly, that person is going to be asked to explain, out loud in front of witnesses, why they signed." Farrow stared at him. "Sir," she said, "permission to speak freely." "Granted." "That's not enough." Vale did not react. He waited. "They killed 210 people," she said, and her voice cracked on the number because she had done the arithmetic and there was only ever going to be one survivor and the arithmetic did not care how she felt about it. They shot a shuttle. They opened the habitats. Sir, they opened the habitats after the station was already dead. They went along the row and they did each one. That wasn't combat, that was. She stopped. Started again. And you're telling me the answer is a signature on a form. I'm telling you the answer starts with a signature on a form. Sir. Lieutenant, he said it without heat, sit down. She sat down. Vale pulled the other chair around and sat in it, which she had never seen him do. And for a moment he looked not older but simply tired, the way a load-bearing wall might look tired if walls could. You want them burned, he said. Say it, it's not a crime to feel it. Pharaoh's jaw worked. Yes, sir, she said, I want them burned. Right, he nodded slowly. Now here is the thing that nobody tells you at the academy, and I'm going to tell you now because you're going to be in rooms someday where it matters. Burning them is easy. Do you understand? It is the easiest thing in the world. We have the ships. We have the yards. If Earth decided tomorrow that the answer was fire, the Dominion would be a memory inside of 5 years, and we would not even have to work particularly hard at it. Then we would be them. He let that sit. We would have done exactly what they did, at a scale they could only dream of, and every argument we made afterward would be noise. That is what they are counting on, Lieutenant, not our restraint, our rage. They want us to come at them screaming because a screaming enemy is a legible enemy. A screaming enemy can be shown to their citizens on a broadcast. A screaming enemy justifies the fleet they've been building. Pharaoh said nothing. What they cannot survive, Vale said, is being taken apart carefully. He picked up the warhead fragment again. Every ship they have catalogued and disarmed. Every officer who gave an order in this system, named, arrested, and put in a courtroom with the doors open and the record public. Every yard that built these things, inspected and shut down or converted. Every requisition traced to the desk it came from. Not a war. A dismantling. Slow, boring, exhaustive, and absolutely without mercy in the only sense of the word that matters. He set the fragment down again. That is what absolute looks like when adults do it. It takes longer. It costs more. It is not satisfying, and when it is finished, they cannot do this again ever to anyone. Which is more than fire would give us. Pharaoh looked at the fragment on the table. Sir, she said, how long have you been thinking about this? For the first time in 6 days, Idris Vale almost smiled. Since 8:34 on the first day, he said. Someone has to, you were busy. The recording that long patience carried back from Kepler's reach was 411 terabytes. It contained the full sensor record of the attack as observed from 11 light minutes. It contained the 6-day forensic map. It contained the warhead fragment, sealed in an evidence can with Pharaoh's signature and Vale's on the chain of custody tag. It contained the station's own black box, which the engineering team had cut out of the wreck of the primary hab on day 4, and which had recorded everything. And it contained 41 seconds of audio. Pharaoh had found it. She had been sifting the station's comm buffer, which was corrupted almost to uselessness, and she had pulled a fragment out of it the way you pull a splinter, and she had played it once, alone, in the sensor pit at 300 ships' time, and then she had sat very still for a long time. It was the Dominion cruiser's hail, broadcast in the clear because they had not cared who heard. A voice, translated by the station's own software, said that Kepler's reach lay within the sovereign volume of the Dominion. It said that unlicensed habitation was a violation. It said that the station had 90 seconds to acknowledge. The station acknowledged in 11. A woman's voice, the station chief, a man named Torvald Reyes, was already dead by then, so it was Inez Okonkwo, the air scrubber woman, 19 years on the rock, said that there were 211 people aboard including 43 children, that they had no weapons, that they were a civilian relay, and that they were requesting the cruiser stand by while they compiled their registry. There was a pause of 19 seconds. Then the Dominion voice said, "Registry noted." Then the first warhead. Pharaoh played it for Vale the next morning. He listened to it once, standing with his hands behind his back, and when it ended he did not speak for a while. "Registry noted," he said at last. "Yes, sir." They wrote it down. Vale's face had not changed, but something behind it had. They knew the number. They knew about the children. They asked for the registry, they received the registry, and they logged it, and then they fired. That is not a mistake, Lieutenant. That is not fog of war. That is a bureaucracy killing people and filing the paperwork. He turned around. "Copy that fragment 11 times, he said. "Physical media, not network. Distribute the copies among 11 different crew. Tell them where they're going and tell them what happens to it if we don't arrive." "Sir, do you expect that we won't arrive?" "I expect nothing," said Vale. "I prepare for everything. That's not pessimism, it's arithmetic." He paused at the hatch. "Lieutenant, that 41 seconds is going to be played in a courtroom. It's going to be played on every broadcast on every world in the Dominion, whether their government likes it or not. It is going to be the single most consequential piece of audio in the history of this century, and you found it." "I was just running the buffer, sir." "Yes," said Vale. "You were doing your job carefully at 3 in the morning when you were exhausted and grieving and nobody was watching. That's what finding things is." He went through the hatch. "Get some sleep, Pharaoh. It starts when we get home." Earth did not scream. That was the first thing the Dominion got wrong, and in the end it was the thing that killed them, though it took them 2 years to understand it. The sovereign Dominion had a doctrine. It was written down. It had been written down for 400 years, refined by committees, taught in academies, embroidered on banners in halls where men in good coats gave speeches. The doctrine held that expansion was accomplished through demonstration. You went to the edge of a thing. You broke something at that edge, conspicuously and without warning. And then you waited, and the thing you had broken something at came at you, angry and unready, and you broke that too. And everyone watching learned the lesson, and the border moved. It had worked on the Cassin Compact. It had worked on the Ilir. It had worked twice, on the loose federation of stations out along the braid, whose name the Dominion no longer bothered to record, because there was no longer anyone to insist on it. Kepler's reach was a demonstration. That was all it had ever been. Captain Superior Vashit Koren of the Ascendant Reach had been given a target list and a doctrine and a timetable, and he had executed all three with what his fitness report would later call exemplary decisiveness. He had asked for the registry because the doctrine required an acknowledgement. He had received it. He had logged it. He had fired. And then he had gone home and waited for the humans to come screaming. They did not come. For 11 weeks, nothing happened at all. The Dominion's border command watched the Sagan drift with every instrument it had. They expected a punitive squadron. They expected, at minimum, a diplomatic rupture, an expulsion of envoys, a fiery address broadcast on every band. They had prepared responses to all of it. They had, in a vault beneath the Ministry of Sovereign Affairs, a pre-drafted casus belli waiting for a date to be filled in. Instead, they got a letter. It was delivered by a single unarmed courier that stopped at the border beacon, transmitted, and left. It was addressed to the Dominion's Ministry of Sovereign Affairs. It was 140 words long, and it did not contain a threat, and it did not contain the word war. It said that on a given date at a given time, a vessel of the Dominion had destroyed a civilian relay station and killed 210 people, including 43 minors. It said that Earth possessed a complete evidentiary record of the event, including the vessel's own broadcast hail. It said that Earth was requesting the surrender of the vessel's commanding officer and the officers of his tactical section for trial before a court of competent jurisdiction. and the surrender of the records of the requisition and tasking orders that had produced the attack. It said that a response was requested within 90 days. It was signed by a deputy undersecretary, whose name nobody in the Dominion had ever heard. The Ministry of Sovereign Affairs laughed at it. That is not a figure of speech. There is a recording, entered into evidence 2 years later, in which 11 senior officials laugh out loud in a marble room. One of them, Prime Sovereign Counselor Ivat Marash, is heard to say, "They want to sue us." The Dominion did not reply. On the 91st day, Earth replied to the non-reply. There was no announcement. There was no ultimatum. What there was instead was a fact, which arrived at the Dominion's outermost picket at 400 local, and which the picket's watch officer spent 40 minutes refusing to believe. Every Dominion vessel in the Sagan Drift had stopped. Not been destroyed, stopped. Their fusion plants were running, their life support was nominal. Their crews were alive and awake and screaming into comms that no longer transmitted. But every drive coil in the volume, 11 vessels, from a corvette to a heavy escort, had gone inert inside a 9-second window, and no amount of cursing or cycling or prayer would bring them back. Around them, in a sphere 40 light seconds wide, sat 41 human ships that had not been there an hour ago. Lieutenant Adiz Pharaoh watched it from the flag bridge of the Concordat, and she did not understand what she was seeing either, and she had helped plan it. She was by then 24. She had spent 11 weeks in a windowless room on Luna with 60 other people, and had come out of it with a promotion she had not asked for and a job title that did not exist before she was given it. Evidentiary Liaison, Task Force Ledger. Ledger, that was the name they had chosen. Not vengeance, not retribution, not any of the 40 operational names that had been proposed and rejected in the first 3 days, one of which had been Hammerfall and had been struck from the list by an admiral who had written, in the margin, in red, a single sentence Pharaoh had made a copy of and kept. "We are not a hammer. Hammers are for people who cannot read." Ledger. "Ma'am," said the rating at her elbow, "the Dominion picket is transmitting. Open channel, it's he winced. "It's not diplomatic." "Log it," said Pharaoh. "Timestamp it, don't respond." She looked at the plot. 11 red icons dead in the water. 41 blue icons around them, not closing, not firing, simply present. "Ma'am, they're going to think we're going to kill them." "They are," Pharaoh agreed, "for about 9 more minutes." Vice Admiral Idris Vale. The promotion had been immediate and enormous, and he had accepted it the way he accepted weather, came out of the plodding alcove with his hands behind his back. "Status," he said. "All 11 inert, sir. Coil lock confirmed on every hull. No casualties reported and no distress consistent with hull breach. Their point defense is live and they're welcome to use it. We're outside envelope." Pharaoh paused. "Sir, they've got a corvette running its plant at 140% trying to force the coils. If they keep it up, they'll melt something." "Then we should tell them to stop," said Vale. "Comms, open channel, all bands, plain language, their tongue and ours. Text as follows." He spoke it from memory. He had written it 11 weeks ago, and he had not needed to look at it since. "To the vessels of the Sovereign Dominion in this volume. Your drive coils have been disabled by a directed field effect. The effect is not lethal, is not spreading, and has not damaged your reactors, your life support, or your hulls. It cannot be reversed by you. Cease attempting to force your coils. You will damage your plants and we will not be able to help you quickly if you do. You are not under attack. You will not be fired upon unless you fire first. You are hereby detained pending inspection. Human vessels will approach and board. Your crews will not be harmed. Your crews will be fed, given medical attention if required, and repatriated. Officers below the rank of sub-commander are not accused of any offense and will be released at the border within 30 days. You are directed to power down weapons, open your ordnance bays, and stand by. If you comply, no one aboard your vessels will die today. That is a promise and we will keep it. This message will repeat. The rating at com swallowed. Sir, sending. The message went out. And then Pharaoh watched something she had not been able to imagine in any of the 11 weeks of planning, which was 11 warships full of people who had been told their entire lives that humans were animals, sitting in the dark, listening to a voice tell them, in their own language, that they were going to live. The corvette powered down first. Then the escort. Then, one by one, in an order that Pharaoh would later realize corresponded exactly to how long each captain had served, the rest. At 4:51, the last Dominion vessel in the Sagan Drift opened its ordnance bays. Not one shot had been fired. The thing that had killed their drives was called, in the technical literature, a phase-locked coil resonance inducer, and in the fleet, universally and immediately, the leash. It was not a weapon. That was the point that human negotiators would make over and over for 2 years, with increasing weariness, in increasingly ornate rooms. It did not destroy anything. It could not breach a hull, could not touch a reactor, could not harm a person. What it did was reach into the specific and rather elegant lattice of a Dominion drive coil. A design the Dominion had not meaningfully changed in 3 centuries, because it worked, because it was theirs, because changing it would have been an admission and put it to sleep. Humanity had had it for 19 years. That was the detail that broke the Dominion's mind when it finally came out, and it came out because Earth published it. 19 years. It had been developed by a research consortium on Ceres for the entirely unglamorous purpose of stopping pirates without killing the hostages in the hold, and it had sat in a drawer, refined and tested and quietly improved, because the people who had it had never had a reason large enough to justify showing it to the galaxy. Kepler's reach had been a reason. Pharaoh had asked in week 3, in that windowless room, the question that everyone was thinking and no one wanted to be the one to say. Sir, if we had shown them this 10 years ago, would they have attacked the reach? Vale had been quiet for a long moment. No, he'd said, probably not. Then 210 people are dead partly because we were prudent. He had not softened it. Yes, that's on the ledger too. Write it down. It goes in the record with everything else, and when the historians come for us they will find that we wrote it down ourselves, and that will matter more than you think. He'd looked around the room at 60 exhausted faces. We are not going to pretend we are clean. We are going to be accurate. Accurate is stronger. The campaign that followed took 22 months and was, by any conventional measure, the least dramatic war in recorded history. It had no battles. It had 140 engagements, and in 131 of them nobody died at all. It had procedures. It had checklists. It had, at its heart, a single repeated event performed 140 times with the patience of a man clearing a minefield. The event went like this. A human formation would arrive in a volume. It would arrive from a direction the Dominion had not thought was a direction, because human survey work, 4 decades of it, done by cutters like Long Patience, unglamorous ships full of people counting rocks, had produced a chart of the drift and the marches beyond it that was, it turned out, roughly 40 times more detailed than anything the Dominion possessed. The Dominion had maps of where it had been. Humanity had maps of everything. The formation would deploy the leash. Every Dominion drive in the volume would stop. And then the message, always the same message. You are not under attack, you will not be harmed. Comply and no one dies today. That is a promise and we will keep it. And then if they complied, boarding parties in soft armor with their weapons slung, moving through corridors full of terrified people, escorted by a Dominion officer who had been given the choice and had chosen this. Inspection. Ordnance inventoried and removed. Drive coils extracted and crated. Ship's log copied under seal, original untouched. chain of custody signed by one human and one Dominion officer, both names in the record. And then the crews, fed, examined, interviewed once with counsel present and a recording running and the right to refuse, and then put on a transport and sent home, minus their ships, minus their officers of sub-commander rank and above who were named in a warrant, minus in the end, nothing else. They kept the promise 131 times out of 140. 9 times they did not, and that was not for lack of trying. Pharaoh was there for one of the 9. It was month 11. The place was a fortified anchorage at a star the Dominion called Sovereign's Rest, and the difference was that the anchorage commander was a man named Sub-Commander Otto Vresh, and Otto Vresh had decided that he would rather be a story than a prisoner. He had 4 vessels. When the leash took them, he did what none of the others had done. He ordered his point defense to fire on the boarding shuttles at maximum rate, and then he ordered his reactor scrammed in a way that was not a scram. Pharaoh was in the flag plot when it happened. She heard the boarding officer's voice, absolutely level, say, "Taking fire." 2 shuttles hit, requesting permission to withdraw. And she heard Vale say, "Withdraw, now all parties." "Sir," said the operations officer, "we can suppress that PD in 9 seconds. "With what?" "Kinetics, sir, precision. We take out the mounts." "And the mounts are 11 meters from a magazine and 40 from a compartment with 206 people in it whose names we have." Vale did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. Pharaoh had served under him for 11 months by then and had never once heard it. "Withdraw, reset the perimeter, talk to him." They talked to him for 19 hours. Pharaoh was the one who talked in the end. That was not planned. It happened because at hour 14 Vresh stopped responding to the negotiation team and said, on an open channel, that he would speak to the officer who had found the fragment. They had published that too, of course. Earth had published everything, the sensor logs, the forensic map, the chain of custody, the names of the analysts. It had seemed insane to some people at the time. Vale had insisted. Nothing sealed, he had said. Nothing sealed except what protects a person's safety, and the reason is simple. A secret is a thing they can accuse us of lying about. A published fact is a thing they have to argue with. So Otto Vresh, sitting in a dying ship at Sovereign's Rest, knew the name of the 23-year-old lieutenant who had grappled a warhead casing out of the dark, because he had read it in a document his own government had banned and he had read anyway. "Put me on," said Pharaoh. Vale looked at her for a long moment. "Do you want to?" "No, sir." "Good," said Vale, "put her on." The channel opened. Pharaoh sat down. Her hands were shaking and she put them flat on the console and they stopped. "Sub-Commander Vresh," she said, "this is Lieutenant Commander Adiz Pharaoh." A pause, then a voice dry and tired in accented standard. "You are young." "Yes, sir." "Do not call me sir." Something in the voice moved. "I have 4 ships and no engines, and a reactor I have made unhappy on purpose. Do you know what that means, Lieutenant Commander?" "It means you have about 6 hours before containment fails," said Pharaoh. "It means you've put 206 people in a compartment on the far side of the ship from the plant, which tells me you did the math and you want them to have a chance. It means you're not actually trying to kill your crew. You're trying to make sure we can't take you." "Silence." "Sub-Commander," said Pharaoh, "can I tell you what I think?" "You will regardless." "I think you were at Kepler's reach." The silence went on a long time. "I was not aboard the Ascendant Reach," Vresh said finally. "No," said Pharaoh, "but you were in the squadron, your ship was picket." "You heard the hail, you heard the registry," she swallowed. "You heard the number." 211, said Otto Vresh, 43 of them children. 210, said Pharaoh. 1 survived. She's 15. Her name is Priya Anand. She's on Luna. She's learning to be a structural engineer, and she is very, very good at it, and she has nobody because everybody she knew was on the rock. The channel hissed. I did nothing, said Vresh. That is the thing. I sat in my ship and I heard it and I did nothing, and then I filed my log and my log says nothing to report. I know, said Pharaoh. I've read it, it's in evidence. Then you know what I am. I know what you did. Pharaoh closed her eyes. Sub-Commander, listen to me. You think the choice is between being taken and being a story. It isn't. Those aren't the only two things. There's a third thing, and it's worse than both of them, and I'm going to ask you to do it anyway. And what is that? Live, said Pharaoh. Come out. Get in a courtroom with the doors open and the cameras running and say, out loud in front of your own people, that you sat in your ship and heard the registry and did nothing. Say the number. Say the number out loud where 400 billion people can hear you say it. Her voice did not break. She was not sure how. Sub-Commander, you can be a man who died at Sovereign's Rest and got a plaque, and in 9 years nobody will remember your name. Or you can be the reason it never happens again. You have information. You have a signature chain. You know whose desk the order came from, and I think you have wanted to say so for 11 months. Nothing, for 90 seconds, nothing. Then you are asking me to be a traitor. I'm asking you to be a witness, said Pharaoh. The word for what you'd be betraying is not your people, sir. Your people are 206 frightened crew in a compartment aft, and 400 billion citizens who are being told right now that we are animals who eat prisoners. You wouldn't be betraying them. You'd be the first person in 400 years to tell them the truth. The reactor at Sovereign's Rest was scrammed properly at hour 19 by Sub-Commander Otto Vresh, personally, with a human engineer standing beside him reading the procedure off a slate. He walked out of his ship with his hands visible and his uniform correct, and the first thing he said on the boarding shuttle to a 19-year-old raiding from Mombasa who did not know what to do with it was, 211, 43 of them children. Write it down. The Dominion tried 3 times to make it a war. That is the part that gets left out of the summaries, and it should not be, because it is the part that costs the most. A dismantling is not a thing you do to a patient. It is a thing you do to something that is fighting you, and the Dominion fought, and the fighting killed people, and the ledger recorded every one. The first attempt was doctrinal. In month 4, having concluded that the leash must be a fixed emplacement or a limited-run device, the Dominion consolidated. They pulled 61 hulls out of 11 systems and massed them at a star called Thrashing Gate, and they sent word, through channels they believed were secret, and which were being read in real time by a woman in Nairobi with a headset and a cup of tea, that they would meet the human fleet in open volume and settle it. Vale did not go to Thrashing Gate. He went to Anvil Yard. Anvil Yard was where the Dominion built its drive coils, not its ships. Those were assembled at 9 sites. But the coils, the elegant 3-century-old lattice that every Dominion hull in existence depended on, were grown in exactly one place, in vats, by a workforce of 11,000, because centralizing it had been efficient, and because nobody had ever needed to think about it, and because the doctrine did not have a chapter on what to do when someone attacked your supply chain instead of your fleet. Pharaoh was on the Concordat's bridge when they arrived, and she watched Vale look at the plot of Anvil Yard, 11,000 civilian workers, 4 orbital foundries, a defensive garrison of 6 vessels, and she watched him do the thing he did, which was to become very still. Sir, said the operations officer, we can take the foundries out from here. 4 kinetic packages. Nobody's in the vat halls at this hour. We've got the shift schedule. The casualty estimate is under 20. Under 20, Vale repeated. Yes, sir. Who's 20? The operations officer opened his mouth and closed it. Their names, said Vale. Get them. We have the shift schedule. The shift schedule has names on it. I want the names of the 19 or 20 people we are proposing to kill printed on this bridge in 9 minutes, and then we will discuss it." Nobody spoke. "That's not rhetoric, Commander. That's an order, go." The names came up in 7 minutes. There were 22 of them. Vale read the list all the way down, out loud on the bridge, and it took 90 seconds, and it was the longest 90 seconds of Pharaoh's life. Then he set the slate down. "No," he said, "alternative. And here is what they did instead. And it took 9 days instead of 9 minutes. And it is the thing the Dominion never forgave and never recovered from. They took the yard. Not bombarded. Took. They leashed the garrison and they boarded it, and then they went to the foundries and they broadcast, on every channel and every frequency and in every dialect spoken in that system, a message to 11,000 industrial workers that said, 'You are not soldiers. We are not going to hurt you. Your shift is over. Please walk to the muster points. There will be food. You will be paid.'" Paid. Pharaoh had argued about that line for 2 hours and had lost. Vale had said, "They have families, and their government is about to stop existing in this system. And if we do not feed them, someone else will, and that someone will teach them to hate us. And it will cost us less to be decent than it will cost us to be right." 11,000 people walked out. And then human engineers went into the vat halls, and they did not blow them up. They cataloged them. They took the master lattice templates, 4 centuries of accumulated craft, the crown jewel of the Dominion's industrial base, and they copied them, and they published the copies openly to every polity in the region, including the Dominion's own citizens, which destroyed their value as a state secret forever. And then they pulled the tuning cores out of every vat and crated them, and they left the vats standing, and they left the foundries intact, and they left 11,000 workers standing in a muster yard, eating human field rations and watching their entire economic universe be taken apart with hand tools by people who kept saying, in bad accented Dominion, "Excuse me, please step back, thank you." The Dominion fleet at thrashing gate sat in open volume for 19 days waiting for a battle that never came, and then discovered that they had no source of replacement coils, and then discovered that this was public knowledge, and then began to come apart. The second attempt was worse, and it was the reason the ledger had a column that nobody liked. Month 9. A place called Hesper's Landing, a Dominion colony world of 40 million. Human forces had leashed the orbital defense and were moving to inspect, and the planetary governor, a man named Dech Ivarin, whose name Pharaoh would spend the rest of her life being unable to say without her mouth going flat, ordered his ground batteries to fire. Not at the human ships. He could not reach the human ships. He fired on his own orbital habitats, 3 of them, 11,000 of his own citizens, on the grounds that if the humans took them, they would be corrupted, and that a Dominion citizen who had been in human hands was no longer a Dominion citizen. Pharaoh read the intercepted order. It was 4 lines long. The last line said, "The sovereign does not accept returns." Human ships got to 2 of the 3 habitats. They got 8,000 people off, in an evacuation that used every shuttle in the fleet in 31 hours, and cost the life of a pilot named Theodor Havson, who made his last run with a hull breach and a failing suit because there were 9 people left on the pad, and he had done the math on how many trips remained. They did not get to the 3rd. 3,041 people died at Hesper's Landing, killed by their own government, in front of a human fleet that had come to disarm, and could not shoot the batteries because the batteries were in the middle of a city. Pharaoh was 25 years old. She sat in the flag plot and listened to it happen, and she could not do anything at all. Afterward in the corridor, she found Vale standing at a viewport alone. "Sir," she said, and had nothing to follow it with. 3,041, said Vale to the viewport, plus Havson, 3,042. "Sir, that's not." "Don't," he said it gently. "Don't tell me it isn't ours, it's on the ledger, Everything is on the ledger, Lieutenant Commander. That's the entire point of the name. We came here, that's a fact. He fired because we came, that's a fact. He is a monster, and we are not, and both of those are facts, and all four of them go in the record together. And I will not have anyone under my command pretending that the arithmetic is simpler than it is. He turned around, and his eyes were red, and Pharaoh understood then that she had been wrong about him for 2 years, that the stillness had never been an absence. That, he said, is what it costs. That's the price of doing it right instead of doing it fast. If we had come here with fire, Hesper's Landing would have burned in an hour and 40 million people would be dead, and HFY would be a martyr on a stamp. Instead, 3,042 are dead, and 37 million are alive, and HFY is going to sit in a chair in a courtroom in 11 months and be asked, by a prosecutor in front of his own grandchildren, to read that fourth line out loud. He looked back at the viewport. It's not a good trade, Pharaoh. It's just the best one available. Anyone who tells you it feels good is lying, and anyone who tells you it doesn't matter is worse. The third attempt was the one that nearly worked, and it came from a direction nobody had planned for, because it did not come from the fleet. It came from Earth. Month 14. The Dominion, having lost its coil production and its border and its narrative, did the only intelligent thing it did in the entire war. It stopped fighting humanity and started arguing with it. They released footage. Some of it was fabricated and was exposed within days, which cost them badly. But some of it was real, and the real footage was worse, because the real footage was Hesper's Landing. It showed 3 habitats coming apart. It did not show whose batteries had fired. It did not need to. It showed human ships in the frame, and it showed 3,000 people dying, and it went out on every network in human space with a caption that asked a question. And a great many human beings, decent ones, thoughtful ones, people who had lost nothing at Kepler's reach, and had been watching a war they did not understand grind on for 14 months at enormous cost, asked the question back. The vote came in month 15. Pharaoh watched it from the Concordat, 11 light-years out, on a delayed feed, in a wardroom packed so tight that people were sitting on the deck. A parliamentary chamber on a planet she had not stood on in 2 years debated for 9 hours whether Task Force Ledger should be recalled. The motion to recall failed by 41 votes. 41 out of 1,100. And what turned it, Pharaoh watched this, and she has never been able to watch it again, was that at hour 7, a 19-year-old structural engineering student from Luna walked to the witness table, because the chamber had called her, because someone on the committee had decided that the record should include a person. Priya Anand had grown. She had cut her hair. Her wrist had healed crooked because the ship's doctor on long patience had set it in a hurry, and she had refused to have it rebroken, and nobody had ever asked her why. She sat down. She was asked to state her name and her connection to the matter. "My name is Priya Anand," she said. "I was on Kepler's reach." She was asked whether she supported the campaign. And she was quiet for a long time, 11 seconds on the record, which is an eternity in a chamber, and then she said, "I don't know how to answer that. Everyone here wants me to say yes or wants me to say no, and either way I'd be a prop. So I'm going to say something else and you can do what you like with it. I was in the machine shop. Inez Okonkwo made us practice getting into suits until we cried about it. She was not being kind. She was being right, and those are different, and I didn't understand the difference until I was 15 and alone in the dark for 26 hours. You are asking whether it's worth it. 3,000 people died at Hesper's Landing, and that is a real thing, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But here is what I know that you don't, because you weren't there. The Dominion did not attack us because they wanted our rock. They attacked us because they had a book that said if you break something small, the people it belongs to will come at you badly, and then you can break them too. That's the book. That's the whole book. It worked on the cassin. It worked on the ilyar. It worked on the braid, and there's nobody left from the braid to come here and say so. So when you ask me if I want it stopped, understand what you're asking. If we stop now, the book still works. It just doesn't work on us. And in 11 years or 40 years, they'll find someone smaller than us, and the number will be 211 again, or it'll be worse. And there won't be a 15-year-old with a beacon, because Inez Okonkwo won't have been there to make them practice. You want me to say I forgive them? I don't. I want you to understand that that's not what's being decided here. What's being decided is whether the book gets taken away from everyone forever, or whether we make it a book about us and go home. I'd like it taken away, not because of me. I'm not the point. I've never been the point. She looked at the committee. 210 people who are not in this room are the point, and they can't come, so you got me. The motion failed by 41 votes. In month 19, the sovereign dominion asked for terms. It was not a surrender, exactly. There was no longer a single entity capable of surrendering. What there was by then was a prime sovereign counselor named Ivat Marash sitting in a marble room in a capital where the power had been out for 9 days because the orbital solar collectors had been leashed, and nobody could get up there to restart them, being told by her own admirals that the Dominion Navy consisted, as of that morning, of 11 vessels with functional drives, all of them in dock, none of them armed. Because Task Force Ledger had spent 22 months taking every single other one apart with hand tools, while the crews stood in muster yards eating field rations. 241 warships. That was the number. 241 hulls, from corvettes to the 4 great sovereign-class dreadnoughts that had been the Dominion's answer to every question for a century, catalogued, boarded, disarmed, drive-cored, and towed. Not destroyed. Towed. 19,000 crew repatriated. 11,000 tons of ordnance rendered inert and logged. 411 officers of sub-commander rank and above taken into custody under warrant, each one arrested by name, each arrest recorded, each with a lawyer inside 48 hours. And the dreadnoughts. Pharaoh was there for the last one. Sovereign's word, 4 kilometers of her, the flagship, the thing the Dominion put on its currency. She had never fired a shot in the entire war. She was leashed in her own home anchorage, in orbit above the capital in daylight, where 40 million people could look up and see it. Vale did not blow her up. He did something that Pharaoh understood, watching it, was the most brutal thing she had ever seen a human being do. He parked her. He had her drive cores pulled and her magazines emptied and her reactors banked to minimum, and then he left her exactly where she was, in a stable orbit, intact, gleaming, 4 kilometers of Dominion pride hanging over the capital city, visible every clear night forever, doing nothing at all. "Sir," said Pharaoh, "they'll salvage her the moment we leave." "They can try," said Vale. "The coils are on a barge to Ceres and the templates are on the public net, and there is not a vat left in this polity that can grow a lattice. She'll hang there for 100 years. He watched the plot. Every night, every child in that city is going to grow up looking at her and asking their parents what she is, and their parents are going to have to answer. The trials opened in month 24, in a converted assembly hall on Ceres, and the first thing anyone noticed was the doors. They were open. That was not a metaphor. Somebody had unbolted them and taken them off their hinges and carried them away, and there was a walkway where the doors had been, and anyone at all could stand in it and look in. There were no tickets. There was no accreditation. There was a queue, and the queue moved, and people from 31 polities stood in it in their coats and shuffled forward, and looked into a room where 411 officers of the sovereign dominion were going to be asked to explain themselves. Every second of it went out live, unedited on every band, with translation into 400 languages, including. And this was the detail that Pharaoh thought about most. In the years after, including into Dominion Standard, on a carrier strong enough to punch through the Dominion's own jamming, which the Dominion maintained for 11 days and then quietly stopped maintaining. Because it turned out that a government that has just lost a war cannot also lose an argument with its own citizens about whether they are allowed to watch television. 400 billion people watched. Pharaoh testified on the 9th day. She was 26. She wore her uniform because she had been told to and she hated it, and she sat in a chair that was too low, and she answered questions for 6 hours, and the questions were not friendly, because the defense had counsel and the counsel was excellent, and that had been insisted upon by Earth in the terms over the objection of a great many people who had lost family. Lieutenant Commander Pharaoh, said the defense counsel, a Dominion advocate named Sesh Ordle who had taken the case because nobody else would and who would, 11 years later, be elected to something. You were 19 days into your first posting. Yes. You had never seen combat. No. You had never seen a fusion warhead detonate. Not before that day. And yet you are the Crown's expert on what happened at Kepler's Reach. No, said Pharaoh, I'm a witness to what my instruments recorded. The Crown has 11 experts. I'm the person who was in the chair. Ordle nodded slowly. He was not a fool. He had a job and he did it well, and Pharaoh respected him more than she expected to. Lieutenant Commander, you have testified that you wanted them burned. The room went quiet. Yes, said Pharaoh. You said this to your commanding officer 6 days after the event, on the record. Yes. That's in evidence because your government put it in evidence. Yes. Why? Pharaoh looked at him. She looked past him at the 411 in their rows in the chairs. She looked at the walkway where the doors had been, full of people in coats. Because it's true, she said, and because if we'd hidden it, you'd have found it, and then the only thing anyone would remember about this trial is that we hid something. So we put it in ourselves. She shifted. Advocate, you're going to argue that we're not impartial. You're right. We're not. We're the injured party and we're running the court, and that's a real problem, and I don't have a good answer for it. What we did instead of pretending was this. We published everything, we gave you counsel, we gave you the right to call any witness including ours, we recorded every second, and we left the doors off. That's not impartiality. It's the closest thing to it that was available, and I'd rather be honest about the gap than lie about it. And if the court convicts my clients and history decides it was vengeance, then history will have the complete record to decide with, said Pharaoh, which is more than the Kassangat, or the Ilyar, or the braid. Vashit Koran took the stand on day 41. He was not what Pharaoh had expected. She had spent 2 years building a man in her head, and the man in the chair was not him. He was small. He was neat. He had the hands of a clerk and a voice that did not carry, and when he was asked to state his name, he said it so quietly that the recorder asked him twice. He did not deny anything. That was the thing that made it unbearable. He sat there for 9 days and he agreed with every fact the prosecution put to him. Yes, he had asked for the registry. Yes, he had received it. Yes, it had specified 211 souls including 43 minors. Yes, he had logged it. Yes, he had ordered the first strike 19 seconds later. Yes, he had ordered the habitats opened afterward because doctrine required that a demonstration be unambiguous. Yes, he had ordered the shuttle destroyed because doctrine required that a demonstration have no witnesses. Yes, yes, yes. On the 6th day, the prosecutor, a woman from Jakarta named Ramawati who had buried nobody and had been chosen for exactly that reason, asked him the question that 400 billion people were waiting for. Captain Superior, did you understand that there were children on that station? Yes. How did you understand it? They told me it was in the registry. Did you read the registry? I read the registry. Out loud. A pause. My tactical officer read it out loud, on the bridge. That is the procedure. So the number was spoken aloud, on your bridge in your hearing, 19 seconds before you fired. Yes. And you said, and I quote from your own log, which your government surrendered under the terms, and which the defense has stipulated is authentic. Registry noted. Yes. Why? Vashit Koren sat in the chair for a very long time. Because it was noted, he said. The room made a sound, not a gasp, something lower and worse. Captain Superior, said Ramawati, I want to be certain the record is clear, because this record is going to outlive everyone in this room. Are you telling this court that you acknowledge the presence of 43 children as an administrative step? Yes. That the acknowledgement was the point, rather than the children. Yes, Koren's voice did not change at all. You are trying to make me say that I did not think about it. I thought about it. I want that understood. I'm not a man who did not think. I thought about it and I concluded that the doctrine did not have an exception and I had looked for one and there was not one, and so I noted the registry and I gave the order. He looked up for the first time in 9 days. I was told my entire life that this was correct. 40 years. It was in the book. Men I admired wrote the book. If you want to know what I am, I will tell you. I am a man who was correct according to the book, and the book was an abomination. And I did not notice. And there is no sentence you can pass that is worse than sitting here and being asked, out loud, by a woman from a planet I have never seen, in front of my own daughters, to explain that. He was convicted on day 51. 210 counts. He did not appeal, though he was offered the appeal, and the appeal was real, and 11 of the 411 won theirs and walked out free, and Earth published those verdicts as loudly as the convictions. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Not death. There had been an argument about that, and it had gone all the way up, and the ruling had come down in one line that Pharaoh had printed and kept next to the red ink margin note about hammers. A court that kills is a court that can be accused of wanting to. The name that mattered came out on day 109, and it came out of Otto Vresh. He testified for 4 days. He was a poor witness in the technical sense. He rambled, he corrected himself. He twice had to stop. And he was the most devastating human being to enter that hall, because he was not a monster and everyone could see it. He was a middle-aged officer with a bad back who had sat in a ship, and heard a number and filed a log that said nothing to report. And he said so, in detail at length, 17 times, until people in the walkway were weeping. And on the 4th day, he produced a document. It was a requisition. It was for a lot of ordnance, and the lot number matched a fragment of casing that a 23-year-old had grappled out of the dark 900 kilometers off a rock's north face, and it was countersigned. The countersignature said Ivit Marash. The Prime Sovereign Counselor had signed the tasking order for Kepler's reach personally. She had signed it because the doctrine required demonstrations above a certain scale to be authorized at cabinet level. She had signed it in a marble room with a pen at a desk on a Tuesday, and then she had gone to lunch, and 11 weeks later she had sat in the same room and laughed and said, "They want to sue us." That recording was played immediately afterward. The prosecution had been holding it for 109 days for exactly this. Ivit Marash was arrested in her own capital 9 days later, by Dominion officers, under a warrant issued by a Dominion court, which had been reconstituted 11 weeks earlier by a provisional assembly that had formed itself out of the wreckage, and had, in its first act, voted to accept the jurisdiction, because 40 million people had watched Vashit Koren say the words registry noted and had gone into the streets and had not gone home. Nobody from Earth was in the room when they took her. That had been deliberate. Vale had refused formally, in writing, to allow a single human being to participate in the arrest. Why, Pharaoh had asked. Because in 90 years, Vale said, There will be a Dominion child in a classroom who is taught that we did all of this to them. That's inevitable. It's how people survive being wrong. And on that day, I want the record to show that the woman who signed the order was arrested by her own people, in her own capital, under her own law, and that we were 9 light years away, watching it on a screen like everybody else." He shrugged. "It's the only argument that survives a century. Everything else is just us saying so." Maresh was tried for 11 months. She did not go quietly. She was brilliant and vicious, and she nearly turned it twice. And there was a stretch in the 7th month where the Dominion press had decided she was a victim of a show trial, and the polling had gone against, and Pharaoh had sat in a hotel room on Ceres at 3 in the morning, genuinely believing they were going to lose. What broke it was not the requisition. It was not the recording. It was not any of the 11,000 pages. It was that she took the stand in her own defense in the 9th month, against the advice of her counsel, and was asked by a Dominion prosecutor, not a human, a Dominion prosecutor, a young man named HFY whose own uncle had died at Hesper's Landing, a simple question. "Counselor, if you had it to do again, knowing what you know now, would you sign?" And Ivet Maresh, who was brilliant and vicious, and who had never once in her life been in a room she did not own, made the only mistake that mattered. She told the truth. "Yes," she said, "it was correct. It is still correct. You are all children and you will understand when the next war comes." The verdict took the jury 4 hours. Priya Anand was 21 when she read the impact statement. She had not wanted to. She had said no 3 times. It was Pharaoh who asked in the end over a bad connection, and Pharaoh had hated herself for it and had said so, and Priya had said, "Don't. If you'd asked me for anything else, I'd have told you where to go. This is the thing I have. It's the only thing I have. Let me use it." She stood up in the hall on Ceres with the doors off. She was not in a uniform. She had a slate in her hand and she did not look at it once. "My name is Priya Anand," she said. "I'm a structural engineer. I build habitat frames. I'm told that's an odd thing to build given. It isn't. It's the only thing that made sense. I'm here to tell you what was lost, and I'm going to do it badly, and I'd like you to sit through it anyway, because 210 people can't." Inez Okonkwo ran the scrubbers for 19 years. She was not nice. She was not warm. She made us practice suit drills until we hated her, and she is the reason I'm standing here, and she died at her post, and I know that because the black box has her voice on it saying get the kids to the shop, and the shop is where the suits were, and she knew that, and she was not thinking about herself. Torvald Reyes ran the station. He was bad at it. He was a nice man who was bad at his job, and everyone knew it, and everyone liked him anyway. He grew strawberries. They were the only good thing in that dome. Everything else tasted like the water reclaimer, and he'd hand them out on Fridays like they were nothing. There was a boy called Matthias who was 6. There was a girl called Ren who was 11 and who was going to be a terrible person. I want that on the record. She was awful. She stole my tools and lied about it to my face, and she was 11, and she was going to grow out of it, and now she never will. And I'm not going to stand here and make her a saint because she'd have hated that. That's what 43 children means. It means Ren, who was awful, times 43, all different. I've listened to this trial for 2 years. I've heard the word doctrine 4,000 times. I want to say one thing about that and then I'll sit down. Captain Superior Corin said the book had no exception. He's right. It didn't. That's not a defense, it's the charge. The exception is the part you're supposed to bring yourself. That's what a person is. That's the entire job of being a person, and you had 40 years to do it and you didn't, and you noted the registry. I'm not going to ask for anything. There's nothing to ask for. You can't give me a rock back. I just want it written down. All of it. Their names and what they were like and the fact that Ren stole my tools. Write it down and put it somewhere a child can find it in 300 years, so that when someone hands them a book with no exception in it, they know what it costs. That's all. Thank you for leaving the doors off. The dismantling took another 6 years, and almost nobody watched, and that was the point. Wars end with a ceremony. Dismantlings end with an inspection schedule, and inspection schedules are boring, and boring was the entire strategic objective. And Pharaoh came to understand somewhere in year 4 that she was participating in the most successful military operation in human history, and that it looked exactly like accounting. 241 hulls. Every one of them was accounted for, and the accounting was published quarterly, in a document that ran to 1,100 pages, and that Pharaoh, by then a full commander, edited personally for 6 years because Vale had asked her to and because she had discovered, to her horror, that she was good at it. 41 of the hulls were scrapped. That was the ones too old or too specialized to be anything else, and even those were not simply destroyed. They were taken apart at Ceres by mixed human and Dominion crews, and the alloy went into the general market, and a great deal of it went, by a routing that Pharaoh arranged and never told anyone about, into habitat frames. 111 were converted. Warships make appalling civilian vessels, too much power, too little hold, but they make superb hospital ships and survey cutters, and the kind of long-endurance rescue platform that can sit at the edge of a shipping lane for 4 years waiting for something to go wrong. 91 of those 111 went back to the Dominion. Unarmed, drive limited, with human inspectors aboard for the first decade, and the Dominion took them and used them. And by year 9, one of them pulled 400 people out of a mining collapse at a place called Varen's Fault, and the Dominion press did not mention where the ship had come from, and Earth did not correct them, on Vale's specific instruction. 89 were kept in a yard at Ceres, not in service. Kept. Cold, dark, hulls intact, drives cored in long rows, and the yard had a gate, and the gate was open, and anyone who wanted to could walk down those rows and read the names off the bows. 400 million people did in the first decade. There was no plaque. Vale had refused the plaque. He said the ships were the plaque. The 4 dreadnoughts stayed exactly where they were. And the yards. That was the part that took 6 years, because a warship is a thing you can tow, but an industrial base is a thing you have to convince. 9 assembly sites. Anvil Yard and its vats. 11,000 workers there and 40,000 more across the rest, and every one of them a person with rent and a family and a skill that had exactly one buyer. They did not shut them down. Pharaoh had assumed they would. Everyone had assumed they would. It was in 3 of the 4 draft term sheets, and it had been struck out of all 3 by the same hand. You cannot end a war machine by closing a factory, Vale had said, in a room in year 1, to people who did not want to hear it. You end it by giving 40,000 skilled people something else to build. If we close these yards, then in 19 years there will be a generation in this polity that grew up poor and angry and unemployed and being told, correctly, that humans did it. And they will build another fleet out of spite in a decade. I've read the history. So have you. Do not make me quote it. So Anvil Yard grew habitat lattices instead of drive coils, on templates that Priya Annan's firm licensed to them for a fee of 1 credit per unit. And the vats ran, and the 11,000 kept their jobs, and there were human inspectors in the halls for 20 years, and the inspectors were, by every account, insufferable, and the yard hated them. And the yard also grew 40 million square meters of habitat frame, for a polity that had never in 4 centuries built a single thing for the purpose of someone living in it. The sovereign dominion did not end. That was a thing people got wrong afterward, and it had to be explained a great many times. It reorganized. The provisional assembly became a real one. It kept the name for 11 years and then, in a referendum that passed by 9 points, changed it, and the new name was not interesting and was not meant to be. It had elections that were bad and then less bad. It had a constitutional article, drafted by a committee that included sesh order, that said that no order of a certain class could be issued without the issuing officer reading aloud, into the record, the number of civilians in the target volume. Article 9. Everyone called it the registry clause, and nobody had to explain the joke, and it was not a joke. Idris Vale retired in year 7. He did it quietly, which surprised nobody, and he refused every honor, which surprised nobody either, and he wrote one document on his way out. It was 11 pages. It was not a memoir. It was a procedural annex, filed with the Fleet's Doctrine Office, titled Considerations in Punitive Operations Against a Non-Compliant Polity, and it was the most cold-blooded thing Pharaoh ever read. It had a section on the cost of restraint. It said, in the flat language of a manual, that doing it this way would take 4 times as long, cost 11 times as much, and would result in the deaths of some number of people who would have lived if you had simply burned everything and gone home. It gave the Hesper's landing figure. It said the figure was the correct one to use for planning. And then it said why anyway, in 4 sentences that Pharaoh could recite at 80. Fire ends a fleet. It does not end a doctrine. A doctrine is a belief held by people who are still alive, and the only known method of ending one is to make it impossible to hold in public, which requires the people holding it to be alive, in public, and asked. Everything in this annex is downstream of that sentence. She found him on the last day in the yard at Ceres, walking the rows. He was in a coat, not a uniform. He looked like anybody. Sir? Not for another 4 hours. He nodded at the hull above them. Sovereign class name plate, letters 2 meters tall. Do you know what I keep thinking about? No, sir. Inez Okonkwo. He put his hands in his pockets. 19 years running scrubbers on a rock. She made children practice suit drills until they cried, not because she thought anything would happen. Because it might, and because doing it right was free and doing it wrong was not. He started walking again slowly. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what we did for 8 years, Pharaoh. We ran the drill. It wasn't heroic. It was maintenance. Sir, said Pharaoh, 241 warships. 241 warships, Vale agreed. 411 officers. 11 convictions overturned on appeal because we let them appeal, and I want those 11 remembered more than the 400 because those 11 are the proof. He stopped at the end of the row. And 210 people who are still dead. Don't ever let the first 2 numbers make you forget the third. The third is the reason. The moment the first 2 become the reason, you've become them, and it will not feel like it at the time. It never does. He shook her hand. You'll have my job in 9 years, he said. Sir? Not a compliment, a warning. He almost smiled. The next one won't be the Dominion. It'll be someone else, and they'll have watched all of this, and they'll have concluded that the lesson is to make sure there are no survivors and no fragments and no 41 seconds of audio. And you'll be standing in a room with people telling you that the only answer is fire, and they will have very good arguments and some of them will be right. He let go of her hand. Run the drill anyway. Adiz Pharaoh made admiral at 39. She served for 22 years, and she never fought a war, and the fleet she inherited was 4 times the size of the one Vale had commanded, and it had leashes on every hull and a doctrine annex, 11 pages long, that every officer had to be able to recite before they could hold a watch. There was never another Kepler's reach. Not because nobody tried, 3 polities tried in her time, and each time the thing that stopped them was not a fleet. It was a lawyer, or a broadcast, or a leaked requisition, or in one memorable case, a junior officer of a foreign navy who had watched the Ceres trials as a child and who walked into a compartment and said, out loud, on a recorded channel in front of his captain, "Sir, please read the registry." That officer was cashiered. He is a senator now. The rock is still there. They did not build on it. There was a proposal in year 11 to put a proper memorial complex on Kepler's Reach, with a visitor's center and a museum, and it got quite far before Priya Anand, by then 40. By then the most sought-after habitat engineer in 6 polities. By then a woman who did not raise her voice and did not have to ask to address the committee for 4 minutes. She said, "No, leave it. It's a rock with a crater and some stubs where the array was. That's what it is. That's what it looks like when someone with a book does this to you. If you put a building on it, in 90 years the building will be the thing, and the rock will be a feature of the building, and children will go there and be bored. Leave it broken. Let them come out and look at it through a window and be cold. Put one thing on it, put the registry, all 211 names, and next to each one a sentence about what they were like. Inez made us practice. Torvald grew strawberries. Wren stole my tools. One sentence. Cut into the rock deep so it lasts. And put mine on it too, with the rest. And put the sentence that says survived. Because I don't want to be separate from them, and I have never wanted to be separate from them. And I am so tired of being the one who is separate." They cut the names into the north face, where a warhead casing had once tumbled 900 kilometers out into the dark and been grappled by a 19-day lieutenant, who was doing her job carefully at the wrong hour. You can see them from a ship at 400 kilometers if the light is right. Adie's Pharaoh went out one last time at 61, on a survey cutter, because she had asked for a cutter and not a flagship, and the fleet had grumbled and given her one. Long Patience was long gone, scrapped in year 14, her alloy in a habitat frame somewhere, which was the correct end for her. But the cutter they gave Pharaoh had the same bones and the same terrible coffee and a sensor pit where the watch ran quiet. She sat in the pit for a while in the back, out of the way. There was a lieutenant in the chair, 22 maybe, chewing the inside of her cheek. Pharaoh did not say anything to her. There was nothing to say that the girl had not already been made to recite. They came around the rock's north face at 400 kilometers, and the star that had no name anyone used came up over the horizon of it, and the light went along the names, one after another, 211 of them, cut deep, and it took 11 seconds for the Terminator to cross them all. Somewhere below and behind her, 440 light-years away, 89 warships sat cold in a row in a yard with an open gate, and 4 dreadnoughts hung over a capital where the children who had been born the year of the trials were now buying houses, and a woman named Ivet Marash had died in a cell 9 years ago, of age, having outlived her doctrine by 4 decades, and having never once, in any interview on any record, said that she was sorry, which had been, in the end, the most useful thing she ever did, because they had let her keep saying it, and 400 billion people had listened to her say it and had decided. That was what absolute had meant. Not a burned world, not a dead people. 241 hulls on a manifest, 411 names on a docket, 11 acquittals published as loudly as the convictions, a doctrine dead of exposure in an open room, 40,000 shipwrights growing habitat lattices for a fee of 1 credit, and a clause in a constitution that made an officer say a number out loud before he could kill anyone. It had taken 38 years. It had not felt good on a single day of it. The young lieutenant in the chair looked back at her, once, the way they do when they want to ask something and are working out whether they are allowed. "Ma'am," she said. "Permission to speak freely." Pharaoh closed her eyes, and there was Idris Vale in the censor pit with his hand on the back of her chair, saying, "Record everything. Get it right. Let the rest wait," in a voice that had not changed at all. "Granted," she said. "Ma'am, my grandmother says we should have burned them." "I know," said Pharaoh. "Mine said the same thing. So did I once out loud to a man who wrote it down and put it in evidence." She opened her eyes. The names were still going past, one at a time in the light. "Ask me the real question, Lieutenant." The girl swallowed. "Was it worth it?" Pharaoh watched the north face of Kepler's reach turn slowly under the light of a star with no name, And she thought about a 14-year-old arguing cheerfully about a torque fitting on the last morning of the world, and about a girl in a suit in the dark with her heater off doing arithmetic on a battery, and about 11,000 people in a muster yard eating field rations, and about a small neat man with the hands of a clerk saying, because it was noted, out loud, where 400 billion people could hear him. No, she said, it was necessary. Those aren't the same, and anyone who tells you they are is selling you a book with no exception in it. She stood up and put her hand on the back of the girl's chair, not on her shoulder, on the chair. Get the names right, Lieutenant. That's the whole of your job right now. Get the names right and let the rest wait.